Today, I want to show you how I turned this into this into this. Now we have a lot to get through, so let's just jump right into it. Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start from the beginning. Step 1 is creating the template. You can download and print this template for free from the description if you want to make your own mask. If you're wondering, I made this template in Blender using Vec3D's 3D model, so thank you Vec3D. Once I had the template ready, I used a bit of spray adhesive to glue the template to cardboard, more specifically poster board, which is a type of cardboard suitable for making, well, posters. That makes sense. As you can see, these pieces of paper fit together like a puzzle to form one larger shape. Whenever I'm cutting cardboard like this, I just try to enter a state of flow. Try to relax and just trust the process. It's tedious, but rewarding. And if you're listening to stuff in the background, time just sort of flies by, and before you know it, you'll have all the pieces cut out and ready to be assembled. Well, actually, not quite. Before we can assemble the pieces, see these broken lines? Those represent where the cardboard needs to be scored and folded. The dashed lines represent mountain folds, while valley folds are represented by dotted lines. For the mountain folds, I scored the top of the cardboard, but for the valley folds, I scored the back of the cardboard as it naturally folds better that way. Once everything's been folded, we can move on to the next step, which is assembling. To assemble this mask, we start by temporarily taping the edges together. For some of the really skinny strands, like this one right here, the tape is not really necessary, I just immediately glue those. But otherwise, using tape first before glue is actually important because if you just start gluing everything together right away, you might accidentally glue things at the wrong angle, and that can throw off the entire shape. So by using tape first, the whole structure remains flexible until you're confident everything is aligned correctly and ready to be permanently glued. Speaking of glue, I didn't use too much super glue for this part because we're gonna have to remove these pieces later, but we'll come back to that. So, I'm curious, what did you think of Deadpool and Wolverine now that the movie's been out for over 6 months? Feel free to comment below, I'm genuinely curious to hear your opinion. Personally, I was very entertained. I thought the entertainment factor was really strong, but the plot felt a little weak. Overall, it had some great moments, but I wouldn't say it lived up to the whole Marvel Jesus thing.
Marvel Jesus.
Speaking of Jesus, something you probably didn't know about me is I actually believe in Jesus Christ and his teachings. Yeah. No, I'm actually serious. I used to think, it's all silly. But, I'll tell you what, to me, it's hard to deny the resurrection. Like, if this Jesus guy really did rise from the dead all those years ago, I mean, that changes everything. Off topic, I know, but I just wanted to share a little bit about myself and also share with you the good news today, which is that even though you and I are sinners deserving of judgment, John 3:16 says God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. And that, my friends, is no Deadpool joke. Well, carrying on with the project now, at this point we can glue these long fins to the helmet piece. And see this line right here? That shows exactly where to glue the two pieces together to ensure proper alignment. Alright, that's looking a lot more like a Wolverine mask now. However, we still have a long way to go if we want this mask to look great. You know how when you open up a brand new pair of shoes, there's those inserts, like those support structures inside the shoe to maintain its shape? Well, that's kind of like what we're doing here. These support structures help keep the mask in the proper shape as we coat the cardboard in a hardener. In case you're not familiar with what this mysterious brown liquid is, it's called fiberglass resin. Basically, once you mix part A and part B together, that kicks off a chemical reaction which causes the liquid to harden, and this is perfect for coating cardboard with. After everything hardens in the proper shape, I'll separate the fins from the helmet piece. Now, the cardboard is still a little bit flimsy. The fiberglass resin changes the shape of the cardboard, but it doesn't actually make the cardboard totally stiff. For that, we need to use this material here called fiberglass cloth, and soaking this cloth in resin makes the structure super duper rigid, which is important for preventing cracking. On the back of the fin, these two pieces here will be removed, and I'll add them back after I've applied the fiberglass cloth. By the way, if you're ever using this in a cold environment, it's a good idea to blast the resin with a heat gun for like 5 to 10 seconds because this type of resin may not cure properly if it's too cold. I did my best to get into every nook and cranny to make sure nothing remains flimsy, and then while the resin was still wet, I stuck these pieces back into place. Everything should be rock solid now. And next we can begin sanding. First I'll use my Dremel to get rid of any sharp pointy bits that are inside the mask, but more importantly we need to sand the outer surface of the mask to smooth out the shape so that you can't tell where the seams are anymore. If you're curious, I'll link the tools and products I used in the description, like for example this electric mouse sander I'm using. I love this tool because it's so efficient, but whenever I need a bit more control I still prefer to sand by hand. Okay, so hear me out. If you use filler primer in a rattle can, you need to try this product right here. It's called 2K High Build Primer. Now, those rattle cans are fine, like they'll get the job done, but they're like basically a diet version of this stuff, which is way thicker, way faster, and saves you a lot of money in the long run because those spray cans add up really fast. Of course, this stuff is way more expensive up front, but in the long run, it makes so much sense. I first heard about this product from a nice gentleman I follow named Offer3D, and it's honestly been such a game changer, so shout out to him. Also, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, basically, this gray stuff you're looking at is just a really thick paint that hides scratches and imperfections. Once sprayed, it can be sanded with 320 grit, and then we'll paint everything black. Moving on, I'll mask off this eye section right here because everything else is about to get painted chrome. This right here is a 2K gloss clear coat. Basically what that means is you mix part A and part B together and it makes for a very glossy finish. This glossy finish is important because the chrome paint that we're about to use must be sprayed over top of a glossy black surface, or else the chrome will just look like a dull silver. The chrome paint I'm using is called a Lumiluster. It's a great paint, but a little pricey, and there's plenty of other chrome paints out there that would also suffice. Afterwards, I sprayed more of that 2K clear coat from earlier. On that note, it's important to mention that many chrome paints don't mesh well together with certain clear coats, so it's always best to do research beforehand. In a moment, I'm gonna paint everything black again, but before I do that, using some liquid latex, I have to mask off any areas where I don't want the black paint to go. Essentially, everything is gonna get painted black except for these areas that I'm covering, and the goal in the end is to make it look like some of the black paint has chipped and scraped off, revealing the bare metal underneath. There's one more thing I have to do before I give it that final coat of black paint, and that is, I'm gonna use some mosquito mesh and spray adhesive to mask off a grid pattern in this middle section right here. This is a small little detail I noticed on the real mask, and we'll see if it turns out well or not. Well, I can now finally paint those fins black, and after removing the mosquito mesh, I was pleasantly surprised that it worked as I intended. It's not a perfect copy of the real mask, but I think it's close. Fun fact, the real mask is not truly black. There's a subtle hint of a metallic blue in there, but I decided to call it a day and leave it black and just give it a nice 2K matte clear coat. This clear coat works similarly to the first one we used. You mix part A and part B, except this one has a matte finish. If you look closely, there's a bit of a grainy texture in the clear coat, and I think that might have happened because my clear coat was contaminated. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's because I tried to measure the clear coat with a syringe, and either the rubber or plastic part of the syringe must have reacted badly with the clear. But you live and you learn, it's no big deal. After peeling off the liquid latex from earlier, I was absolutely thrilled to see how awesome it looked. These lines I'm highlighting on the template represent where the fabric seam lines are supposed to go. Well, I say fabric seam lines, but we're not actually going to use real fabric. Here's what we're going to do instead. Right here, I have some 2mm thick EVA foam that I'm going to cut up into tiny strips, and I'll glue 2 parallel strips along each of the pink lines, like this. The idea is that once we cover over this, it'll give the illusion of a fabric seam. Weirdly enough, this was one of the most fun parts of the whole build. Like, I don't know what it was, but watching all those crisp lines come together was a super satisfying and relaxing process. Next, I added some caulking here to create a slightly smoother transition between the foam and the cardboard. This will make our fake seams look not as fake, but you'll see what I mean in a moment. Like I mentioned, we won't be using fabric. Instead, I'm going to use some 0.75mm thick EVA foam. Before I glue this foam to the mask, I'm going to add a texture to the foam by heating it up with a heat gun and then pressing this plastic canvas over the foam. This imprint won't be deep enough on its own, but it'll serve as a clear guide for where to score the foam. I honestly expected this to take really long, but having those lines already marked out made this process go by a lot faster than I anticipated. The actual texture on the real mask is a bit more sophisticated than this, but I think this still looks pretty good. Well, it's time to glue the foam to the mask, and we'll do it section by section following where the seams are. Not gonna lie, I was kind of scared to mess this part up, so I started with one of the smaller sections. That way I could build some confidence and work my way up to the bigger sections. As you can see, that little bit of overhang gets tucked into the gap we made earlier, and this is what's gonna give the illusion of a fabric seam. At first, I considered using contact cement, but I'm so glad I used spray adhesive because this type of glue gives you a bit of time to reposition whatever you're gluing before it fully sets. This is very handy because gluing this foam to the mask is a bit tricky since you have to find a way to stretch the foam over the mask without causing any wrinkles, and it takes a bit of fiddling and repositioning until the foam finally cooperates with you. But once it does, it looks great, and look at those seam lines. Those turned out surprisingly good, I think. It's time for more paint. I thinned some cheap acrylic paint with windshield washer fluid and airbrushed it onto the foam. Even though the foam is already yellow, I kinda thought it looked a bit too warm and was aiming for a cooler hue that I felt would match the real thing better. After I was satisfied with the yellow, I mixed brown and black to create a nice gritty, grimy color, and I airbrushed that into all the seams to make it look worn and dirty. I also splotched this paint around the entire mask for added weathering. Now we need to bring back some of that yellow and make the weathering look more subtle and realistic. Finally, we can top it all off with a coat of matte Mod Podge to protect the paint and give it a matte sheen. Remember earlier when I showed you this line right here? Well, before I covered the cardboard with foam, I made sure to keep a little piece of tape that would tell me exactly where that line is. That way I can make sure the fins get glued in the proper spot. Before super gluing, I thought it would be a good idea to scuff the surfaces a little bit to allow that super glue something to grab onto. And then I carefully stuck those fins onto the mask. Following this, I mixed together a bit of 5-minute epoxy and fed that epoxy through a syringe into this little crevice right here. And this will hopefully make sure the fins really stay stuck on there for good. All that's left to do is add the finishing touches to this mask now. I added some foam padding and then I glued white mesh behind the eyes. Finally, there's one last piece in the template that we actually never addressed, which is the chin piece. This chin piece will be made out of EVA foam so that it remains flexible when you're moving your mouth. At first, I considered not making this piece and just skipping it, but I ultimately decided against it because honestly, this chin piece kind of completes the whole look of the cowl. So I just made a really quick one. I used the classic score and heat method to make some panel lines, and then I heat sealed the foam before giving it a few generous coats of Plastidip, which will hide that spongy, foamy texture that we definitely don't want. To wear this chin piece, I simply glued an elastic strap so that I would be able to wrap it around my head like this. And then I was done.
Can we make a deal? We're running out of time. You can rule illumination if we can keep the night. And you can turn the sun away and paint the moon in blood. And another thing, we did the best we could.
Hey, welcome to the MCU. You're joining at a bit of a low point. Do I know you, bub? Nope. But I know you, and I'm gonna need you to come with me right now. Look, lady, I'm not interested. Unfortunately, I need you. And even more unfortunately, my entire world needs you. Trust me, you got the wrong guy. How about you go bother Spider-Man or something? Which one? There's 3. 3 what now? Perfect timing, Mr. Parker. What? Hold on, you know who I am? Oh, you mean the Doctor Strange magic thingamajiggy? Yeah, doesn't work like that. See, I have fourth wall privileges. Watch this. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to print the template, you've got to do it through Adobe Acrobat Reader, which, don't worry, is free. Make sure you click the poster button right here, which will split the pages up like a puzzle. See where it says tile scale? That's where you're going to adjust the size of the mask. For reference, the circumference of my head is 570 millimeters, so if you take the circumference of your head in millimeters, divide that by 570 and multiply by 100, that should give you around the right number to type into the tile scale. Finally, you just have to choose which type of paper you're printing on. It might be letter or A4, and then hit print. If you want to see my previous video where I made a Deadpool mask, then click the screen right here. Thank you, patrons, for supporting me on Patreon, and thank you for watching.